Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you'll get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. They're $10 paperback, $2.99 ebook download, including my latest and bestseller, NYPD Laughing in the Line of Duty. I hope everyone's having a great week, everyone's safe and sound, and let's go to the crime pages of the New York Post. NYPD has launched a manhunt for a person of interest in the random attack of beloved Big Apple star Stephen Buscemi, authorities say. The cowardly thug cold-cocked the Boardwalk Empire star in Kips Bay last week while he was walking down the street, leaving him with a black eye and swollen cheek. So I met Stephen Buscemi once at an event. He was nice, different kind of guy. What's starting to happen in New York now is crime is affecting everybody. And when I say everybody, crime often affects those in the outer boroughs, people in Manhattan who have doormen, people of means that park their cars in indoor parking garages, people that go to the finest restaurants. A lot of them fundraise for these people that are now in power, where you're seeing this crime is happening. I'm not in no way saying that Stephen Buscemi, is fundraising for radical left-wing politicians. But what I am saying is, in Manhattan, and I'm sure he lives in a nice neighborhood, I'm sure Kips Bay is a nice neighborhood, you're starting to see crime is now affecting everybody. And I hate to see anybody, even if I don't agree with them politically, be the victim of a crime. But unfortunately, poor Steve Buscemi got punched in the face. I hope they catch the guy. Oh, and here's another story just like it. Homeless ex-con who randomly punched Ghostbusters actor Rick Moranis in Manhattan was sentenced to 2 years in prison on Tuesday. Marquis Ventura, 37, wore an orange jail garb matching restraint mittens for the hearing in Manhattan Supreme Court, remaining stoic as he was handed down his sentence by Justice Diane Kissel. The hunt for fugitives led... So for him to get 2 years in prison... Now, this happened a couple of years ago, and they're saying he's getting 2 years in prison. That means pretty much it's going to be a time served type thing, because he was probably on Rikers Island. And if they're saying he's wearing restraint mittens, he's not being a good boy on Rikers Island or the Tombs or wherever they've got him housed. So... like the first story with the guy that punched Stephen Buscemi for no reason, and now this guy that punched Rick Moranis. You've got a lot of homeless people and mentally ill people, and for whatever reason, the state and the city closed down the homeless shelters and a lot of these psychiatric facilities, and now you've got these people just kind of wandering around with nothing to do, and they're hurting people. Next story is U.S. Marshals Regional Task Force. U.S. Marshals Regional Task Force closed in on New Jersey fraud suspect Araceli Ortiz on a sixth-floor apartment on Kapok Street in the Spuyten Duyvil section of the Bronx around 6 a.m. Wednesday, according to federal prosecutors. When they hit the door, they found more than what they bargained for in the two-bedroom apartment and stumbled upon the middle of a huge drug operation, Bridget Brennan said. Found stacks of cash and 25 pounds of cocaine and fentanyl, sources say. The U.S. Marshals New York, New Jersey Regional Task Force closed in on New Jersey fraud suspect Araceli Ortiz at a sixth-floor apartment on Kapok Street in the Spuyten Duyvil section of the Bronx around 7 a.m. Wednesday morning, according to federal prosecutors. But they found more what they bargained for in the two-bedroom apartment and stumbled upon in the middle of a huge drug operation, according to Special Narcotics Prosecutor Bridget Brennan. Bridget Brennan, she's still there. Wow, that's a long time. So I know this neighborhood. I worked in the Riverdale section of the Bronx, which covers the 50 precinct, which covers Spuyten Duyvil, that neighborhood. Riverdale is a beautiful place in the Bronx. You don't even think you're in the Bronx. The west end of the precinct, basically you have a beautiful view of the Hudson River and the Palisades, and you have these buildings along Kapok that overlook the Hudson, and a lot of famous people throughout the years have lived there. I remember Willie Mays lived in Riverdale for a while. A lot of actors would live there. Who else lived there? Oh, Nicky Leroy Barnes, the famous heroin and cocaine kingpin, before he was sentenced off to 1 million years in jail before he flipped. So that was always a nice area, but what unfortunately happened was just over the 225th Street Bridge, you've got Washington Heights. Inwood and Washington Heights area. A lot of the drug dealers, what they did was they moved out of there and they set up stash apartments in Riverdale. And when I was a rookie cop in the early 90s, you could get a condo or a co-op or a condominium for like 40 grand. So that's nothing to a drug dealer. And they would have, a girlfriend or their mother show up with cash. This is back in the day when you can get away with this sort of thing. So it's been going on for years. I told a story about me coming up with 4 kilos in that precinct. So there were a lot of stash apartments, and it seems like it's still going on. So hats off to the U.S. Marshals Regional Task Force. I've actually worked with those guys on a couple of cases. They're very good at catching wanted fugitives. So this story is interesting, and it's funny the way it's worded. A decomposing body was discovered outside a Queens apartment building Sunday afternoon after residents whiffed an unbearable stench, according to police. The body of an unidentified adult was discovered by cops at 12:55 p.m. near the scaffolding outside 9240 Queens Boulevard in Rego Park. The body was too badly decomposed to determine the sex or identity and whether foul play could be a factor in the death. Okay, first of all, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm about 95% sure, yeah, there is foul play involved. For the body to smell that bad and it's outside, it was probably dumped there by somebody. Rego Park has always had a lot of sex workers, prostitution places, madams, that sort of thing. So I'm going to go on a guess that it's either a sex worker who overdosed, was beaten to death by a John, and then dumped there, or it could have been a John that got out of line in a place, maybe got a little too handsy with one of the girls, maybe tried to rob the place, and they took care of him. They rolled him up in a carpet. I don't know how he was disposed, but you know what I mean. He was dumped out in front of the building, and for him to smell that bad, yeah, I'm going to go. It's not just a homeless guy just croaked in front of a building. NYPD NAB, alleged migrant gang leader, proves broken window policy works. Yeah, you think? For more proof that the cure for New York City's crime problem is the broken windows policing, look no further than the capture of Victor Parra, the suspected co-ringleader of a migrant gang who got nabbed last week after 3 months on the run, but not for a high-level offense, but for failing to wear a helmet. Parra got busted in February. The Venezuelan allegedly rang a gang of thieves who robbed mopeds and peddled the goods in New Jersey, Yonkers, and Florida, and then shipped cash back to South America. So there was a video of this. I think I spoke about this a couple of months ago. They were basically bike-jacking people in Manhattan. You got all these people with these Vespas and motor scooters, and basically probably what he did was, and the way they caught this guy is broken windows program. So the cops stopped him. He was probably riding a moped without a helmet. They stopped him. They asked for ID. He either had ID or he didn't have ID. He was fingerprinted. And look at this. The guy we've been looking for, who's a scourge to the community. So, and we used to catch people like that all the time. You'd pull somebody over for a suspended license. You bring them into the station house. They have no ID. You run them through the system. And then you find out they're wanted for a homicide or a burglary or a robbery. It just takes the bad guys off the playing field. It's not like the cops just want to go around there and bust balls in the community. But sometimes grabbing a guy for a minor offense leads to bigger and better things. So this story is going to lead to my story. A Florida man who aspired to become a police officer admitted to sexually abusing his cousin during a police department job interview and now faces life in prison. Yeah, they don't screw around with that sort of thing down here in Florida. A Florida man who aspired to become a police officer, Stephen Brody, 26, was convicted by an Orange County jury last week of sexually battering on a child. The office of the state attorney, Andrew Bain, said in a news release. Bodley first mentioned playing sexual games in a sworn officer application with the Apoka Police Department. He mentioned this during he again mentioned the crime during an interview. So this guy wants to become a police officer. What I'm guessing is they were going to put him on a polygraph, because down here in Florida, to become a police officer for a lot of jobs, they put you on a polygraph. He probably panicked and started going into the story about how when he was a teenager, he used to sexually abuse his cousin. down, as I said earlier, down here in Florida, if you sexually abuse a child, you will go away for life in prison. I don't know if they have the death penalty for it, but I do know you will go away for the rest of your life in jail and no parole. So they don't play games down here in Florida. So a question came to me through social media the other day, and it said, where do I get my stories from my books and the podcast? Well, most of my stories come from my books or stories that I want to put in my book, and I'm not that creative enough to write it. But a lot of the stories are mine, or things I've seen, or things I've heard. But I was lucky enough, I have several very witty friends who worked in different boroughs throughout New York City. I'm not going to say their names, but a couple of them worked in the Bronx, a couple of them worked in Manhattan, and one guy was out in Brooklyn. So we talk all the time, and sometimes unwittingly, they'll just say something, and I'll say, oh, that's gold. It's like, no, that's not even a good story. I'm like, it actually is a good story. So hats off to my friends who keep feeding me these stories. So today's podcast is going to be about, it's called Everybody's Got a Past, right? Everyone has a past. And when you come on the job to become a New York City police officer, you have to fill out a ton of paperwork, and then you have to meet with a person from the applicant investigation unit. You're assigned an investigator, and they dig into your background. And, they're looking to find out if you're a stable person who doesn't have a criminal background. And I've gone into the story before where when I was in field training in the Bronx in the mid-'80s, there were two female girls, cops in my field training group that were pulled out immediately. One girl, it surfaced that she had spent time in a drug rehab center out of state, and once that they found that out, she was escorted out and terminated. And another female that I worked with, I had a foot post with this woman a couple of times. Her husband was a cop in another precinct, and her husband and a couple other guys were doing home invasions of drug dealers. And they actually came right to the precinct and locked her up. So, everybody's got a past. And I remember when I was in the police academy, it's funny. Rookie cops and guys in the academy, they're like puppies. They're telling each other too much. And I remember in field training and in the police academy hearing stories from guys. So you're on 2 years probation. So the department, for any reason whatsoever, can terminate you, and the union isn't going to bat an eye. Not that the union really bats an eye when someone with 10 years on the job, they're looking to fire. They'll step in a little bit and they'll get you a lawyer. But good luck. If you've got under 2 years and you're on probation and something surfaces from your background, you were involved in a car accident, you didn't mention it, or you got involved in some kind of skirmish, they'll escort you out of the building and they'll fire you. So two of the stories I have, one is actually sad and one is actually kind of funny. So I'll go with the sad one first, and then I'll go to the funny one. So like I said, guys are always talking about things that they shouldn't be talking about. And what wound up happening was there was this kid. He was a couple of years younger than me. I knew him from the neighborhood. Nice kid, really nice kid, came from a good family, tough as nails. And he becomes a police officer. And I would see him around, I had probably like 5 years on him, maybe more. But I would bump into him at central booking sometimes, or we just, how's this person doing? We would catch up. And I really liked the guy, and he was a good cop. He made a lot of arrests. He was always down at central booking. I mean, squared away. Just what you would expect for a police officer. Well, what winds up happening is one day I find out he got fired. And I said, what did he get fired for? Nobody seemed to know. So I asked around, and I found out it was for drugs. I go, you've got to be kidding me. And they go, no, not now. Years ago. And I go, what do you mean years ago? Well, what wound up happening is, he was in his late teens, maybe early 20s, but I think it was his late teens. Him and his friends, I think, went to Jamaica. And while they were down there, they got involved with some guys, and the plan was to smuggle back some marijuana. And from what I don't know if it's... So what wound up happening is he gets caught at the airport, or maybe even got grabbed by the cops down in Jamaica trying to smuggle a small amount of weed out of the country. So what winds up happening is they arrest him, they bring him to Jamaican police station, but they didn't fingerprint them. Basically, what they did was they gave him like a court summons, and they know he's not coming back, but it's just to scare the shit out of you that you won't come back to the country and screw around. So basically, he goes to the station house. They fill out some paperwork. They give him a court summons, or basically told him don't ever come back to Jamaica anymore. I really don't know either or. But anyway, he comes back to the United States. A couple of years later, he takes the police exam. He figures, who the hell's going to know about this, right? Comes on the job, and like I said, his career is on its way. It's trending in the right direction. And then he tells his girlfriend the story, or she knew about it. And what winds up happening is they break up. And now she has this information, and now she meets another guy. And the other guy, I guess, is jealous of the relationship she had with the ex-cop, or long story short, she tells the story to her new boyfriend. Well, for whatever reason, the new boyfriend had a hard-on for this cop, calls up the Internal Affairs Bureau, and tells them the story. Now, I don't remember if this cop was still on disciplinary probation or not, but Internal Affairs, that's one thing about them. They will go above and beyond. I'm writing a story right now where they flew a team out to Pittsburgh to investigate something. They put a couple of IEB supervisors on a plane, flew them out to Jamaica, and like I said, they weren't fingerprinted. So, and this went back years ago, but they worked with the Jamaican authorities, and basically what they found inside this Jamaican station house was the command log, or a blotter, and they had his name and date of birth and I think a Polaroid. So once they came back to the United States with that information, he was done. They fired him on the spot. And like, again, I don't know if he was on probation or not, but something like that, I think, even if you were off probation, they would say, well, you didn't come on the job in good faith. You didn't disclose this with us, so you're out of a job. And it's sad. I mean, he landed on his feet. He's got a really good job now. He's successful, but you hate to see something like that happen. He was a teenager when that happened, but he didn't put it down. But chances are if he did put it down, they wouldn't have hired him anyway. The other story is actually pretty funny. So I'm a detective in the auto crime division, and there's 3 or 4 sergeants, and each sergeant in the Bronx office had their own team. And there was this one sergeant. It's not like he and I didn't like each other, but we just didn't hit it off. We didn't understand each other. I never had a problem with him. He never had a problem with me, but there was always tension. Probably more on my end than his, but for whatever reason, he never tried to screw me, and I never was a pain in his ass, but we avoided each other like the plague. So 9/11 happens, and we're going through all that. And right a couple of months after 9/11, this is November of 2001, they're having the World Economic Forum in Manhattan. So that's all hands on deck, because what had happened a couple of months earlier, or the year before, they had some kind of event similar in Portland or Seattle, I forget, and it was the beginning of Antifa. And Antifa went in there and really did a job, I think, if you see the Portland or Seattle, and really destroyed Starbucks, and pretty much the same thing they were doing a couple of years ago, but really put a dent on the economy in the Pacific Northwest. So the NYPD had seen that and was like, well, we're not going to let that happen here. So for the World Economic Forum, those couple of days, they probably had 10,000 cops in lower Manhattan around the UN by the hotels and stuff. They weren't going to let these people, destroy Starbucks and stop traffic. So I go down there with my office, and it just was the luck of the draw. Oh, I know what happened. I had a foot post by the UN, and the sergeant that I was speaking about, his driver had an arrest. So he needed another driver, and he called me. I don't know why, but he called me. So I said, hey, boss, what's up? He goes, listen, so-and-so has an arrest. I want you to drive me. I was like, that's fine. So I get in the car with him, and he was retiring soon, actually within days or weeks. It was like coming down to the wire. And I was kind of kidding around because, you work in something like this, something can jump off in a second. You could be in the middle of a riot. And I go, was the overtime that important to you that you didn't just decide to stay home for the next couple of days? He goes, nah, I just want to put in my last couple of days on patrol. And I said, all right. So we're starting to make small talk, and we're starting to, after about a day and a half, because I drove him for 2 days in a row. And by the second day, he kind of let his hair down, and he just started sharing something with me, which I was not expecting. So I don't know how it came up, but at one point he goes, he's just talking about his whole career and, the places he's worked, the people he's met, the things he's seen. And he goes into this story about, his childhood and, growing up in the Bronx and stuff. And then he says, I almost didn't come on the job. And I says, well, would you take a job somewhere else? He goes, no. He goes, I got arrested. And I said, oh, wow, what happened? I guess you beat the case? He goes, no. So I says, oh, now you got to tell me the story. He goes, all right. He says, Jesus, this would have happened in the 70s. He says that him and his friends, he's in the police academy, and him and his friends, and they tell you not to go to bars and go out drinking when you're in the police academy, but I'm guilty of that too. Him and his friends go to some hillbilly bar with live music in Putnam or Orange County, somewhere, and or further upstate, maybe a college town, and they're hanging out, and they don't belong. Everybody knows each other in this bar. They're the New Yorkers, and one thing leads to another, and a fight breaks out. So the next thing he knows, he's getting dragged out. He got thumped a little bit, and he's getting dragged out of the bar by these two hillbilly bouncers. And as they throw him out the door, the cops show up. The bouncers say something to the cops. The cops throw handcuffs on him and stuff him in the back seat of a radio car. But by now, the place has turned into a Donnybrook. It's not just him and his friends fighting the bouncers. Now it's all hands on deck. So after the cops shove him in the radio car, they run back into the bar. And he's sitting in the back seat of the radio car handcuffed, and he's saying to himself, I'm screwed. I'm screwed. I'm going to lose my job. I can't believe this. He's just, what a waste. My father's going to kill me. My mother's going to kill me. And then he says, I'm sitting. He goes, yeah, I was back there a while. He says a good 5 or 10 minutes had passed. He goes, and, people are running out of the bar. He goes, I was a lot more agile back then. He goes, I take my handcuffs from behind my back and I get them over my feet. So now his hands, he's cuffed, he's got them in the front. So what he does is he opens the back door of the police car. He goes, I open the door. He goes, the door's open and I'm just standing there. He goes, and I'm like, if they catch me trying to run away, I know I'm in more trouble. He goes, but if I stay, I'm almost certainly going to lose my job. He goes, so I took off running. I go, well, where did you go? He goes, I really didn't know the area, but I knew they'd be looking for me on the main road. He goes, so I ran through the woods. I go, you ran through the woods? He goes, it was like that movie, The Fugitive. He goes, it was a full moon. He goes, I'm running. And he says, things are cutting my face. He goes, a couple of times I almost ran into a tree. He says, but I ran for a good half hour through the woods. And he saw a highway, a road, and then he kind of followed it. And he found a gas station in the middle of nowhere. Reached into his pocket, pulled out a quarter, put it in a payphone. He called up and he told his brother and his brother was on the job. And his brother says, what? What do you mean you got arrested? Because his brother was like, don't get me in trouble too. And he goes, no, you got to come get me. They don't know who I am. So he went back into the woods because he knew hanging out in the gas station handcuffed, even though no one was around, the cops might come by there. Hid in the woods, and he told his brother, once he hit the parking lot, hit the horn a couple of times. He goes, and I'll come out. And his brother really thought he was pulling his leg, and this is before cell phones and stuff. So what winds up happening is his brother comes into the parking lot, flicks the light, hits the horn. He comes out, and he told him, yeah, bring a handcuff key. Uncuffs him. He takes the cuffs off. I don't know what he did with he probably held on to him, knowing him. And he told me this story, and I says, I can't believe it. Like, he would have been the last guy because he was like a real goody-goody. So, and, did everything by the letter, So I just couldn't believe that happened. And he says, yeah. He says, and so that's got to be, wow. That's got to be like 40-something years ago. So that's a story that he did get away with it. And again, it was a nice guy, and I liked him afterwards. We kind of found, and then now I keep in touch with him on social media. So it's just one of those things. You think you know somebody, and you really don't. And like I said, everybody has a past, no matter how you look at it. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in, especially my friends in Los Angeles, California, Dallas, Texas, Estero, Florida, Cold Spring, New York, St. Leonard, Maryland, and Waltham Forest, which I'm guessing is in England or Scotland. On the front of my puppy, she's doing great. She's getting bigger. She's really a great dog. Unfortunately, she's not trained yet, and she's crapping and pissing all over my house, and it's absolutely killing me. I'm not a clean freak, but at the same time, I mean, who likes to come home to that? But I'm crate training her, but she's definitely testing my patience. If you work in law enforcement or have an interesting criminal background and would like to be a guest on the show, drop me a note on Twitter or Instagram at VicFerrari50. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, please, please, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. If you got any, for my listeners out there, if you have any questions or people you'd like me to interview, please reach out, and you could point me in the right direction that I might have a killer show. So I appreciate it. I appreciate the question earlier of where I get my stories from. And thanks again. And hopefully I'll have another episode out next week. Take care and God bless.